Okay, so welcome back to our next panel discussion. This is Pathways to a CARICOM Digital Identity as a Public Good. We have Mr. Shrikant Karwa, who is from the International Institute of Information Technology in Bangalore in India. Mr. Karwa heads the country adoption efforts at the MOSIP, which is it stands for the Modular Open Source Identity Platform. His passion for resolving challenges affecting the marginalized that require efficiency, scale, and impact, and ended in his joining the team at the UIDAI. I think that's Adar, and he will correct me if I'm wrong, in India, from its early days in 2010, where he provided his expertise in evolving the policy framework, building processes, and managing field rollout operations. Also on this panel, to be chaired by Junior McIntyre, is Dr. Clarence Henry, Senior Technical Officer, Regional Integration of the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States. He's a development economist by training, and he holds a diploma in teaching, a Bachelor of Science in Economics and Government, and a Master of Science and Doctor of Philosophy, a lot of degrees in economic development from the UWI. Coming up the rear is Mr. Mark Arruda, Vice President Solutions of Cloud Carib. He leads a solutions team at Cloud Carib focused on transforming the region. He has 20+ years of global technology leadership experience in startups to multinational corporations in North America, the EMEA and APAC. And to chair this session, I'm really happy to hand over to you, Junior McIntyre, CTU consultant here at the CTU. It's all yours.
Thank you very much, Suzanne, for the introductions. And again, welcome to the panel and the team, and welcome to the wider audience. We're going to be talking about pathways to the whole notion of digital identity within the region as a public good. And we really have an interesting panel here. We have a mix. We have actual service provider that focuses on the implementing an open source solution for digital identity. We have as well in the region the OECS piloting and leading the charge for digital identity, the actual projects on the ground that are being implemented. And we also have a cloud provider that provides the infrastructure to host the platform. So we have the complete package here. And we hope to get real insight and have some really exciting discussions here. Just to let you know that, and to lay the context and some background information, that adopting a regional approach to national digital identity systems really is intended to help us accelerate the digitization of services and advance the proliferation of ICT-enabled economies across the region and societies as well. So we're talking about digital transformation in a broader context. And one of the things that we focus on at the CTU and across the region is the whole notion of increasing our competitiveness and efficiency and functional cooperation as well. You will hear a lot about functional cooperation coming out of the presentations, and entrepreneurial development, innovation, and the welfare of our citizens. So those are the key fundamental issues. While we might be speaking a bit about digital identity, we want in the backdrop of that, we want to be assured that you're clear on the mandate and the imperatives behind implementing a digital identity solution across the region. So the notion of digital identity has been gaining a lot of significance across the international fora. The UN as well as the World Bank have been really promoting the whole notion of digital identities globally. All right, and several Caribbean countries have embarked on projects. We have the OECS, as I mentioned, represented here today. We have Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad, and Tobago have all started initiatives focusing on digital identity as a public good. And so, we're really happy to kind of have this discussion, and we really believe it's timely, for us to move forward in that direction. But we at the CTU see the whole notion of digital identity systems as a public good within the context of the Caribbean single ICT space. And it essentially serves as the backbone for the effective delivery of public services as well as services that will be delivered through the private sector. So the notion of a multiple purpose digital identity serves as, we may hear the term interchangeably used, digital identity as well as foundation identity systems, serve as a unique identifier for governments to assert their verification on citizens. Okay, so, and in the context of that, we're talking about, governments ensuring that there's safe, secure, and access to identities and persons, individuals' privacy and security and personal data is essentially well preserved and maintained. So I would like to hand over at this point to Shrikant, our first presenter, and Suri will get into the whole notion of speaking about an open source platform, looking at the digital identity as a public good. So over to you, Shrikant.
Thank you, Junior. Thank you, Junior. Am I audible?
Yes, I'm hearing you.
Okay,
Yes.
great. Thank you for this opportunity, and hello, friends. We are in different time zones. I'm in India. It's about 9:30 or something over here. I'm making a small presentation to introduce what is MOSIP to this audience. MOSIP is a relatively new concept or a new project in this geography. So I appreciate this opportunity presented. Junior, can you just confirm if you can see my screen? Okay, great.
Yes.
Thank you. So before I start my presentation, I just want to give you a small story of how MOSIP came about in being. So it's about in 2010 when the Aadhaar project, which is India's foundational ID system, was rolling out. And by 2014, 2015, it was a roaring success with 1.2 billion IDs issued and at a cost of less than $1 in that sense. And parallelly, what was happening in Africa and many other places was that ID systems were largely vendor lock-in with private ecosystems, and there was an arm twisting that private players would do to the countries, and there were innumerable examples of failed and expensive ID projects. So there were two opposite scenarios that were playing out. In India, there was a success with the Aadhaar project, and globally there was a lot of unsuccessful projects. So it is in this context that philanthropists like the Bill Gates and likes came together to realize that why don't we create a foundational ID system which is open source, which the developing countries can take, and that is what gave the birth to MOSIP. So that is the history behind where MOSIP came in. MOSIP is actually a global digital public good, which has been built with philanthropic capital, which is for a social good. MOSIP is completely free to countries, including a 3-year support that we provide as a platform support that we provide. In addition, we go around in the countries that MOSIP gets adopted. We try to build an ecosystem, partnering with academia and all of that, because we want MOSIP to be owned by the countries which are implementing them. It's theirs to hold. So that is, really the background in which I want to present MOSIP in. So MOSIP is a robust, secure, open source platform to build foundational ID systems in countries. It is housed at the IIIT Bangalore University. That's where the secretariat is. It is funded by Bill Gates, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the NORAD, which is the Norwegian government, the Omidyar Network and Tata Trust. These are some of the philanthropies that have funded the building of MOSIP. And MOSIP is an open standard-based API platform for ID issuance, ID verification, ID lifecycle management, and presence-based assurance. So it is focused towards establishing the root of trust for identity, foundational layer for service delivery, and foundational ID as an open source infrastructure for the countries. Relatively speaking, MOSIP is actually a very young project. It started in only August 2018, so we are barely finishing 3 years. And our long-term support version is likely to come out in next few weeks. However, in this 3 years, we have built this platform and we have adoption by 6 countries from Morocco, Philippines, where there is full country rollout, and Philippines has already done about 25 million registration using the platform, and the platform is still getting built as we speak with them. And the feedback that we are getting from the field as these countries are rolling out is making the platform stronger, and the long-term support version will be available soon. And the other countries are Sri Lanka, Guinea, Ethiopia, and Togo. So that's where MOSIP is coming. It's an open source, it's a not-for-profit venture. Now, just to give you a context, what is it really what we mean when we say digital transformation? So I'm just taking one example of, let's say, an issuance of a passport. And this is the experience that we have, that when you're issuing a passport, Junior, can you see the screen properly?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay. So when you're issuing a passport, there is many things that you need to do: background check, health check, education, skills, all of that. And today it is an extremely paper-based process, extremely high cost from actual transaction perspective. And how do you take it into a paperless, presence-less environment? That is the digital transformation that you're looking at. And that transformation can happen only when you have a foundational digital ID system in your country, within the region. And that is where this whole thing is. So what is it that you critically require to make that happen? There are 2 critical things that you need to unlock for the digital future. One is interoperability, and the other is establishing trust. So these are the 2 key pillars that you need to get into your system. When you talk interoperability, it is because you will have multiple applications which will be talking to each other, and you need to make them work with each other. And if you are engaging with, let's say, cross-border, or you want to know whether that information is true or not, so trust becomes an important pillar of the transaction. So these are the 2 main things that you need to focus on. Now I'm just getting into a little bit of MOSIP, that when MOSIP was getting built, what were the principles we looked at? Open source. We want it to be owned by the country's sovereign ownership. How do you enable that to happen? Not like a vendor lock-in, which is what MOSIP was fighting. Future-proof, cost-effective, not expensive hardware or proprietary software solutions. Modular, some countries may need some aspects of the solution, so you should be able to take what you want. Extensible, so that applications can get integrated with it. Security is not an afterthought, but it is by intent when you are building the platform. Similarly with privacy, that it is by design that you are building privacy in the platform. And last but not least, very, very inclusive platform. How do you think about the last person standing? And with that, the vision that came out was that you are going to have countries who will be adopting it, multiple countries. So you're going to use open standards and open frameworks so that it's all available and accessible. MOSIP is providing the components, the tooling, the software around the platform. It is going to be used for various services in the country for its delivery. There's people, you need to build ecosystems. So this is the larger vision in which MOSIP is working. Just to talk very briefly about the kind of modules that are already there in MOSIP as of now. There is pre-registration, which is a module by which a person sitting at home can put his information out, the demographic information before and take an appointment. Registration module is a module by which you can go to a center and give your biometrics and use the pre-registration information to register yourself with the fingerprint, iris, photograph. And whether you want to take fingerprint or not is a choice of the country. So the flexibility exists in the platform for such modifications. Eventually, you've got to upload the data, process it, and then leads to the ID issuance. And then followed by that is when you come into the service delivery, where authentication and verification of the ID is involved. And to enable the resident to be in control of the ID that has been issued, you have the resident services, which is like a portal where a resident can log in and, if let's say he's out of the country, doesn't want his authentication to happen or misuse of ID, he can switch it off. Those kind of features are there. And then you have the partner management. So all the partners who are working to use the ID system, how do you manage? So these are broadly the portals that, the modules that are available in MOSIP, and countries can choose which or all they want to implement as they go about it. So typically, how does MOSIP roll out is that a country decides the infrastructure that it wants to do, whether it's a data center, cloud, however they want to go about it. Then they take in the MOSIP platform. Then they get in a system integrator. The system integrator is there to customize, configure the MOSIP platform to suit the country or the region's requirement. And in addition to that, integrate what all additional services like, let's say the biometric services or the devices or the printers or all of that stuff, and integrate that, and then eventually leads to the ID issuance. So in a very, very nutshell, in the limited time, I've tried to give you an idea of what all MOSIP is providing. The key motivation that MOSIP has is, MOSIP has been rolled out in Philippines. It is getting rolled out in Morocco. So in these large countries, MOSIP has already made the presence. So what motivates MOSIP to come to CTU and come to the Caribbean is that in the Caribbean region, MOSIP wants to help build the regional solution, which this region needs, where there is interoperability across countries, which enables easy movement of people, services. That is what is driving MOSIP to be part of this journey. And we hope we can play a small part in that. So that's pretty much from my side, Junior, and I hope I was in time.
Yes, you were. Thank you very much. Excellent. I know we're going to move on to the next presentation. We're going to have Dr. Henry, but things to note, and I guess we can think about it for consideration when we have our discussions. The whole issue of sovereign ownership, all right, and I think that is an important point to note, and the whole notion of developing indigenous solutions that fit the context and the culture of the region, and those are some key points I think that we need to consider moving forward. So I'll stick up in India, and we'll move on to our next speaker. We have Dr. Clarence Henry. He is the senior tech, well, the bios were read before, so I wouldn't get into the bios again. I will just ask Dr. Henry to come and speak to us about what is happening in the OECS region. So Dr. Henry. You're muted. Yes, you need to unmute. Great.
I'm unmuted now.
Yes,
I think.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So good morning to, well, it's now 2:12. So good afternoon to all. Certainly, let me just acknowledge the ministers that are present in this meeting. Good afternoon to you and other colleagues. The OECS Commission is very much pleased to be presenting at the CTU's ICT Week. And so this presentation really focuses on where we are at with the whole concept of the OECS digital ID system. So without further ado, just make sure that I am in play here.
Yes, you are. Yes.
Right. So the presentation will focus mostly on the second part, which is the OECS digital ID system project. But of course, I would make note of the conceptual understanding, particularly the whole question of why the need for a digital ID system within the OECS, and then give some summary remarks, which really will speak to what I think would be the guiding principles for us at the OECS Commission in bringing about the OECS digital ID system. So in terms of the whole understanding of the digital ID system, we do appreciate that effective digital ID system would require the verification and authentication to a very high assurance level, the issuance of a unique ID from birth, which is terminated upon death, and of course ensuring that the whole question of individual sovereignty is brought to bear, and so they need to protect user privacy and to have control over personal data becomes very critical in the process. So why a digital ID? And I just want to spend perhaps just a few seconds on this. it has to be placed within the context for us in the OECS, within the context of the current economic environment that the OECS countries are faced with. So we have low economic growth rates of about 2% on average when compared to about 5 or 6% on average in the 80s, low share in commodity trade globally. And of course, along the lines of declining GDPs, declining real GDP per capita income, which says that households on a whole within the OECS have reduced capacity to address sustainably address their standard of living. And of course, the fact that we have low ranking in terms of the Doing Business, World Bank Doing Business ranking. Now, obviously, the whole question then becomes, how does this digital ID fit into the broader scheme of addressing the challenges faced by small developing states like the OECS in improving growth, improving per capita income, strengthening economic development outcomes and so forth, not forgetting improving our performance in global trade. And it really starts from home. We need to strengthen our capacity internally at the national level and the regional level before we are in a position to be more competitive, if you like, from an economic standpoint. And so the question then becomes, how do you ensure you have in national systems that are efficient and regional systems that are effective in strengthening the outcomes of economic integration regimes like ours in the OECS, and of course, by extension, the CARICOM single market and economy. So the issue of how do you grow the economy, digital ID systems have been identified as a potential pro-growth arrangement that can grow emerging economies like ours by 6% in the coming years. Growing government revenues in the context of COVID becomes a very critical issue where government revenues have been declining. Access to financial services becomes a very critical matter as persons take advantage of the free movement of persons regime and the ability to work and to provide their services across border. Improving the access to the justice system. It was only on Monday that a presentation by my Director General, Dr. Jules, would have highlighted how important it is for digital solutions to improve, for instance, the justice system, social services, and of course, cross-border movements, all of which would strengthen the performance of OECS economies and ultimately contribute to global competitiveness. Now, and I'm going very quickly, given the time that I have. So this brings us to the whole issue of the OECS Digital ID project. So we recognize it has utility at the national and regional level to improve socio-economic performance and to support sustainable economic growth and development. So the question is, how do we do so? The OECS ID project is essentially not the first time that we are attempting a sort of regional approach to the issuance of IDs. Previously, under the IGRIP project, we would have had the multi-purpose identification system as component of IGRIP during the 2013-2014 period. And what we recognize is that while the MPID was considered to be important, it was not effectively delivered. And at the OECS Commission, we wanted to explore this issue. So in 2019, we would have embarked on some member states' missions to engage stakeholders as to the purpose for which, or the reasons, if you like, why the MPID would not have been so successful. And we recognize that on the whole, there are three key issues: political will being limited, issues of technological limitations, and of course, the fact that the onboarding requires the active participation of citizens and the concerns that some citizens have with respect to the utility of an MPID to their own development, whether it be access to government services or otherwise. And so this allowed us to move into a new project, the OECS ID, and hence another assessment was done, which completed in February 2021, this year. And so this assessment explored more deeply what is the reality on the ground with respect to the issuance of ID. And we found that for the most part, foundation systems, while developed, generally developed across the 4 member states that we examined, that being Dominica, Grenada, St. Lucia, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines, you had issues of the systems not being digitalized, no population register or residential registry in place. And certainly while the MPID would have highlighted the development of a unique ID concept, that did not exist or was certainly not being issued. And then they would have also explored how do we now bring about a much strengthened system, and hence the whole discussion of what are the supporting frameworks to move forward. So the integration between foundational systems and functional identity systems were considered to be very important. Examining how do we strengthen biometric collection of biometric information and ensure that such are always stored within the foundational system was looked at. And then, of course, the legal framework. Notwithstanding that the E-GRIP had about 6 pieces of legislation that would have been advocated, and in some cases implemented and enacted in many countries, to support E-GRIP and also the MPID structure, we did recognize the need for exploring the legal framework further, especially in the issue of privacy and security, to strengthen that aspect. And then, of course, a governance structure, because you're not just talking about strengthening national ID systems, but also having a sort of integration layer that would allow for other member states to allow for the interoperability of the ID systems across the 4 member states, and hopefully to allow for other member states. So very quickly, the action plan then brought about 7 key areas that we need to bear in mind. Of course, national implementation plans to recognize that all the member states are not at the same level, the governance framework, the conceptual design to make sure that we appreciate what works and what doesn't work as we put together the ID system, the technological solution, which of course there were 3 options being provided, and for the most part, member states have identified the option that they would prefer, which basically speaks to having a similar system across the member states controlled by the national agencies, but then having an integration layer that allows for cross-border integration of the systems. The public advocacy being critical so that onboarding becomes a much more effective activity, and then the legal framework, of which we have only now published the terms of reference. I think it was on Monday or Friday, we would have done that, for the development of, to the review of policy and legal framework, but for the development of a model legislation in that regard. So let me just quickly give you a sense of the time frame we're looking at for implementation. So obviously, we're adopting here a traffic light system. So the green would indicate what has already been done. The yellow is what's in progress, I would have indicated. So the development of the governance, policy, and legal framework is in progress. I would have spoken about the TOR that is already published to get a legal firm to help us with the legal framework and to review some of the policy requirements for ensuring that we have an effective implementation of the OECS ID. And then, of course, the selection and implementation of the technical solution, which is ongoing. And then the expectation is that we would be in pilot phase by no later than 2024. This project, of course, is heavily financed by the World Bank Regional Health Project and the EU 11th EDF project, which we refer to as the RIGHT project. And so we certainly give credence to these 2 institutions for providing support. So in terms, Junior, and I know my time must be up, but in terms of just giving a sort of a summary of what we hope to see, we do expect from the development of the system that we would help member states like Dominica and St. Vincent and the Grenadines, for instance, to improve the national ID system. And so certainly our member states get to a level of parity where it comes to their national ID system. We're looking to ensure that the IT solutions that are selected allow for cross-border interoperability, and of course, very importantly, open source concept being a critical philosophy here. We're looking to improve the legal framework for ID issuance. So for instance, Dominica does not have legally the recognition of an entity for the issuance of ID. We want to rectify this issue, for instance, through this current work with the drafting of the model legislation and relevant policy and other legal instruments, focusing on data protection and data privacy. And we want to ensure that implementation is people-centered, that we consult with persons, we have an active advocacy approach, strategy to this, and that ultimately the data remains within the control of citizens of the OECS as we advance the implementation process. So, Junior, that is it for me. I'll stop sharing, but certainly we're looking to see this project implemented successfully within the next 2 to 3 years and beyond.
Thank you very much, Dr. Henry. Really good insight into what's happening in the OECS. And so what I would like to do now is to pose a question to our third panelist. All right, that is Mark Arruda. And Mark, are you hearing me?
I can hear you.
Great. So we want to start the interactions, and I know you have a lot to say.
Sure.
And from listening to the two panelists speak, and you're well positioned to talk about the infrastructure around it. And so the question is in the context of, I know data sovereignty was mentioned. And in that context, what role can you say as a regional cloud provider, you can play in the whole notion of deploying secured and safe regional digital identity platform? So just speak to us about that in the context of Cloud Carib, and where do you see
Sure.
the role inside of the process?
And from my perspective, there's a few things that we should focus on. One is obviously security. The other is data sovereignty. And a big one for ourselves as a company is really developing whatever country we're working with in terms of employment opportunities, education, things of that nature, so that it's really a homegrown solution, as you said, with maybe outside help, but really a solution built and powered by the people of the country that it's servicing. That also ties into the fact that you need, in our opinion, you need to have your data stored locally. In terms of data sovereignty, you're talking about citizen data. I mean, if you can imagine, the US would never put their citizens' data in any other country except their own. It just wouldn't be something that they would even consider. And this is not a commercial for Cloud Carib, but the reality is what we do is we build infrastructure in the countries we operate in, so the data remains within country, controlled by, as mentioned earlier, by the citizenry and by the government of that country that is supporting the initiative. If you can imagine things like health records, legal documents, they need to stay in country at all times. That dovetails into security, whereas you need to protect that data, make sure it's always available. Imagine trying to renew your driver's license or a health certificate or data that you need at a certain time, and the system is down. So as you go online and become digital, you need to ensure that that data is always available, as highly available as possible. In some instances, some countries have multiple islands to work with or multiple areas to work with, some don't, so that can be addressed by spreading out the data. But I think that the main takeaways are data sovereignty, so data stays in the country at all times, security of that data, availability of that data, and empowering the people, in the local economy to thrive and make this a productive asset for the country. It's also a matter of knowledge transfer, so that we talked about this earlier. It's more of an indigenous-based solution where you're in control of your own destiny at that point. So for me, those are the things that we need to address to make sure that from a technological perspective, we're ready to go on those fronts.
That's excellent, Mark. I think you summed it up really nicely and brought everything into context. And so we heard about the open source platform it creates the environment for, entrepreneurship. It creates the environment for us to be creative and develop our own solutions for ourselves. But also at the same time, it gives us the autonomy. It gives us the ability to manage our own systems as sovereign states and become less dependent on proprietary products that lock us into specific limitations, vendor lock-in, and I think that's a big part. And we see, looking at the OECS moving in a particular direction and we heard Dr. Jules' presentation yesterday. We are creating solutions for ourselves, by ourselves, and for the people of the region. And so I think that's important. And then we have an indigenous cloud provider, Cloud Carib, with the same vision and the same mandate and has aligned their business processes and policies around developing indigenous solutions and ensuring that our data is maintained at international standards, best practices, at the same time ensuring that the data is accessible within the region. We don't have issues of latency. We don't have traffic going outside. We have local regional data centers, and so we don't have to traverse the internet. We have IXPs, and we have all the critical infrastructure and the ecosystem that's around it, providing that environment for us to really thrive. Not only provide services, but also develop the ICT sector as an industry. So I think this discussion was really interesting. We are unfortunate we don't have the time to field any more questions from the wider audience. But at this time, I think I'm looking at that's it. We have time for additional questions? We don't? Okay. We don't have time for additional questions. My apologies. I wanted to ask a few questions to the other panelists as well. So this was an interesting session. Thank you very much for tuning in. We would like to wrap up now, and we will see you after the break. Thanks a lot. And thank you, panelists. Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I am Keisha Codrington from Trinidad and Tobago. Welcome to the Caribbean Telecommunications Union ICT Week 2021. Do enjoy.
That was Keisha Codrington with a medley of music from the Caribbean, and finishing off on the right note as we go to lunch, which is Black Stallions, Caribbean Man, and I'll add woman, Caribbean Man and woman, Black Stallion. So just very quickly to let you know that we take a short enough break so that we can all sort of recharge ourselves and look forward to, let's see, 1-2 sessions this afternoon. We have a keynote actually from Mr. Cesar Fuentes of Huawei in Latin America, one of the sponsors. Then there's some lightning presentations coming up at some interesting topics, accelerating digital transformation through next generation satellite technologies, achieving greater control and sustainability in digital transformation, regulating the single Caribbean ICT space, a big topic that's been coming up over the last 2 days, cloud services, another one, and a little Q&A time. And then to bring up the rear would be a session that's coming up on, and it's interactive, on rural connectivity policy. So all of that to come after lunch. So have a great lunch break, come back, register for the session, and we'll see you then.